So this video may end up being, will likely end up being shorter than the previous one, but I realized as I was posting that there was something essential that I left out, or something that could be a point of confusion that I left out, and just wanted to clarify in regards to spiritual bypassing and experiencing emotions and energies directly. Because I think that, you know, there was a point here where I would have heard something like that and almost used that to justify getting swept completely, indulging in an emotional state. And it's very subtle distinction, but there's a very big difference between indulging in an emotion, indulging in an energy in a way that maintains it and feeds it and keeps it recurring without allowing it to move through, and actually coming to directly experience it in such a way that the energy or the emotion is able to liberate itself, or becomes moves to its liberated state. And it's a really subtle distinction, but it felt necessary to clarify that, because I used that kind of a message at one point to continue playing out certain emotions and use it to justify, well, okay, I'm experiencing it directly, but there's the distinction here is that it's almost this weird. So in the previous video, I spoke to, you know, something arising in the mind saying, I know this isn't true, and using that I know this isn't true, this isn't the truth of what I am, as an excuse not to feel it. So that's a form of avoidance. And then on the opposite side of things, you could get carried away in it and then say, well, this is what's happening, this is what's expressing, and using that almost as an excuse to indulge it and to maintain the energy. But there's something, and both of those things are unconscious. Both of those things are resistance patterns, because the avoidance, or the it's not true, is resisting the expression and the liberation of the energy, the feeling of the energy, while the other is the one is resisting the expression of, they're both the same thing. They're both resisting the expression, the liberation of the energy, by continuing to resist in some way. So the indulgence is a resistance to allowing the energy to liberate itself, because it comes to be a way to identify with the energy, because you don't know what you would be or who you would be without the energy. And so I very much got caught in that. So, and that's a really important distinction that I didn't mention in the other video. And so there's almost like this middle ground that is reached, where as an energy is arising, it's not indulging in the story. There is an aspect of seeing the story and allowing the story to come through, but it becomes from the perspective of grounding in the truth of what you are. So like inside of yourself, you know, the way that you would with a child, or, you know, like holding space for a friend, if you've ever done that, or if you've ever had a therapist that was just like really kick-ass at holding space and didn't interject, didn't try to talk you out of something, didn't ask you to explain something, and just allowed something to move through from a completely neutral space. It's finding that within oneself. And what that feels like, and it's really like an intuitive sensing into it. Like it's an intuitive process. And it could be that when something is arising, if there is an ability to catch being swept up in something, to kind of go inward and find that place of groundedness. It could be feeling your feet on the ground. It could be, part of it could be, I know that this isn't the truth of what I am, but then from that place of the ground of what you are, of the foundation of the pure beingness, that very neutral place, allowing it to express. And it's being conscious, so having that awareness as the expression is occurring. So that groundedness is essential. Like, it is absolutely essential. And it can be either, you know, if you're fortunate enough to have an awesome therapist that you're working with, who holds space like a champ and has that neutral grounding. It's almost like an electrical current, that it needs somewhere to go in order to liberate itself. That it needs that grounding in order for the energy to find its liberated state. It needs it needs that awareness, to that witness. So it needs a witness, essentially. And you can act as that witness inside of yourself. You can have a therapist acting as a witness, or, you know, somebody that you trust, maybe a teacher that you're working with, or whoever it is, a friend that you really trust, that you know isn't going to try to interject or kind of project their own worldview or their own lens onto something, onto the experience. So that's really essential. So it's almost grounding. So the energy needs to be grounded. The energy needs to find ground in order for it to liberate itself. So that's a really important distinction. And I've fallen into both the trap of saying, well, I know that that's not true, and continuing to suppress it, but I've also fallen into the place of allowing, and this was maybe part of it initially, like actually when the suppression functions broke, and when the mechanisms of the repression broke, it was just like a spewing. And it came to be seen very quickly that like that wasn't it either. There was an intuitive knowing inside that there was something else being asked for, and what was being asked for was that grounding. And so it could be that grounding is found in, you know, quietness, something that one might call meditation. So going into like a meditative state, and like maybe a somatic meditation, a meditative state, feeling into sensations in the body and following them, you know, asking like, what is the story behind this sensation? You know, what is the worldview of this sensation? What are the emotions attached to this sensation? And asking, like inquiring, actually having an inquiry and asking those things. And you can do that inside of yourself, or you can work with a therapist or another person that you trust, that there's a sense of safety to hold a completely neutral container, because the neutrality is really important. That grounding is really important in order for the energy to be able to liberate itself. So yeah, that's just a really subtle way that the mind and the ego can justify expressing something, because like, well, this needs to be expressed. Well, this is what's here. This is what's happening. But if it's occurring from a place of unconsciousness, the pattern is going to keep repeating itself. The energy is not actually going to be able to liberate itself. So it could be that. It could be somatic modalities like TRE, trauma release exercises, vagus nerve reset, Feldenkrais. There's all sorts of modalities that can help facilitate the energy to be able to move through the system. And yeah, so that's I think that's it. But that was something that felt essential to clarify, because this can easily be co-opted by an ego, by an identity, in order to maintain itself, because ego and identity is just, it's so sneaky and it's so subtle, and it co-opts things without us even realizing it, and we realize down the road what was actually happening, and the ways that that maybe like a spiritual concept or a certain like teaching or a certain transmission was used to create a new identity, because that's what ego does, is it abhors a vacuum. It is terrified of what lies beyond itself, and so it does everything that it can to maintain itself. So just something to look out for, something to be mindful of, and yeah, it's a really subtle and intuitive thing, and this may not even quite make sense until it's time. There's like a timing and a readiness to all this, that when it started happening, it was something that was really easy to recognize, and it felt really intuitive and natural. And so really just like trusting the sensations in the body, trusting the intuition. If there's this little like gnawing inside yourself that there's maybe something deeper, or maybe what's happening within you is not quite it, or even if there's a question, like if you're not sure what I'm talking about, or you're like, I'm not quite sure if I know or if I understand, then it's likely that maybe it's not the time, or maybe it's not, it's the readiness isn't quite there yet, and that's totally okay. I mean, sometimes it's just enough to plant a seed, and that's all that's needed. So